I'd like to start by inviting Auntie Jenny to come up and give us a welcome to country, or welcome us to her country.
I need it's like I'm short, but I'll get there. I'll just put that down. I get nervous when I see a lot of beautiful people sitting down looking at me, because I think we all get nervous when we start talking. Anyway, my name's Auntie Jenny. I've been called Auntie Jenny for a long time in different places, schools and other places I do around the area. I come from Coffs Harbour. I grew up in Coffs, seen a lot of changes and still changing. Well, this is a surprise tonight to hear what's going on at this beautiful meeting. People that you're sitting here today is really, really overwhelming, because you just want to do something for something in our area and anywhere else. Anyway, I'd like to pay my respects to our elders, past and present. Also, I'd like to pay my respects to our next generation. Our next generation is our future. They're the ones we have to tell them and let them know we want to keep this beautiful land. With you people around here, with all this knowledge that you've got, it makes me happy to see that we want to keep our land together. And I also want to say, for the people that travelled far from long places, and people that's close by, I know this land is a beautiful land, and I welcome you all on this beautiful land. We share this land with you. We share it with you to keep it the way it is and keep it like this in our future. I know that National Park covers a lot of places, not only here, in other places all over Australia. They always got a good thing to keep going. If it's not koalas, it's something else, to keep this land beautiful for our next generation. But I'm not going to say a lot, because these beautiful people that are sitting in front here has got a lot of knowledge and want to share that knowledge to everyone that sit here today and do their thinking and putting it together. You know, when we all get to one mob, I call it a mob anyway, when we get together, it's like one big mob want to pull together, not pull apart. And that's the way I look at things. But I appreciate you for inviting me tonight, and I've seen a lot of posters up there, a lot of things around the place. It's opened my eyes tonight too. So keep going. And I just want to say one more thing. This koala things that we're talking about, it's even overseas. When them travellers come over here to our land, to Australia, they want to see these beautiful things around the place. And that's what it's all about, protecting them and looking after them. So again, that means hello. And when I go, I say yarrung, that means goodbye. So whatever meeting comes out of this tonight, I hope you all enjoy it and go further wherever we go. Good night.
Thanks, Auntie Jenny. And I'd just like to also pay my respect to, or acknowledge that we're meeting on Aboriginal land, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. Thank you so much, folks, for coming along tonight. It's really exciting to see such a strong turnout to talk about a really central issue for this region, our state and ultimately our planet, which is the future of our forests and the future of our iconic forest-dependent fauna. So really pleased that everybody's been able to make this time. This is really an evening that we're going to do in two parts. We'll start with a series of panel presentations, and then we will have presentations from some of the candidates from the upcoming Commonwealth election. We're hoping that we'll have enough time at the end so that there'll be an opportunity to have a panel discussion where we can take questions from the audience, and we've structured our time that way. So Ishbel's going to be sitting over here and being something of the soup Nazi when it comes to timing she'll be keeping the candidates to their and the speakers to their allotted time. So that's really just so that we have the opportunity for those discussions at the end of the evening. All right, so I'll start by introducing myself. My name's Gary Dunnett. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the National Parks Association of New South Wales. And a big sort of red line under that, we're not NPWS, not the National Parks and Wildlife Service. We're a conservation advocacy organisation, in fact built on a bushwalking club. So people who are really about connecting with nature and generating that sort of love for these natural places. Our presenters tonight are James Sherwood, who's from MPA, and James is actually playing a range of roles tonight, so you'll see him at the panel soon. Dylan Pugh from NEFA, Mark Graham, ecologist and a nature-based tour operator, and Graham Tupper, a conservation advocate and environmental policy expert. We're also being joined tonight by, in person, by 3 of your Commonwealth candidates. Simon Casling from the Liberal Democrats, Kaz Heiss, who's an independent, Tim Knott from the Greens. We have statements from 2 candidates who were interested but not able to be here tonight, which was Keith McMullen from Labor and also Faye, and I apologise for the pronunciation, but Aspitos from One Nation. And once the candidates have given their presentations, I'll read out the statements they provided. Unfortunately, your Nationals candidate, Pat Conaghan, declined the invitation to attend. He seemed to be under the impression that forests and koalas had nothing to do with the Commonwealth, which is interesting. If we just think back a few days ago, the Prime Minister, in fact, was down in Tasmania telling communities that under no circumstances would a coalition government support the withdrawal from forest industry. So, clearly there are Commonwealth implications, whether it's through the regional forest agreements or the fact that koalas are in fact a nationally listed species, along with a whole plethora of other threatened species in this region. So disappointing, but that's where we're at. All right. So look, I just wanted to actually start with, well, why am I here? Why has NPA actually invited people to this? I guess the thing I really want to emphasise from the get-go is that the Great Koala National Park is not a flash in the pan. It's not a concept that, someone's come up with as a great branding exercise, and it's got no history, it's got no merit, it's just there as a branding exercise. NPA was actually started in 1957. The basis of our entire organisation was in fact to advocate for the establishment of a professional park management agency, a world's best practice piece of legislation to actually manage parks, but most importantly, a single scheme of protected areas across New South Wales. Up until that point, you'd had a whole bunch of trusts and other bespoke arrangements across the state. And what we're really saying is that there's got to be a little bit of order in the chaos. So 65 years later, we have some 15 branches, 4,000 members across the state. I've got to say, our heart and soul is not just advocacy, it's actually about connecting people with nature. So it's actually our bushwalking program it really is the foundation of our organisation. And I'm sure there's lots of people here who are motivated by their personal experiences in nature. Now, Ishbel, am I right in thinking? Okay. So the very first piece of national parks legislation in New South Wales the integrated national parks legislation was 1967. A year later, NPA put out a policy which went to government, which, an unremarkable little document, but it actually had the proposals for places like Wallamai National Park in it, what became Bongal Bongals, major extensions to Blue Mountains, Tomaree National Park, Port Stephens Marine Protected Area. So, a year after we got a parks piece of legislation, we were in there actually advocating for the creation of some of what are now the really iconic parks across New South Wales. This one was from early 80s, and Coffs Coast and what's now Bongal Bongals was in that. one of those little offshore efforts, Lord Howe Island, Nightcap. And this is, I'm suspecting people can't actually see, but really it's just a bit of a list of some of the proposals that have actually seen some of our most notable national parks in New South Wales. So I guess what I want to emphasise is that we really aren't here as a sort of flash in the pan. This is sort of core business for us. It's why we exist, to actually advocate for new parks. And at its heart, the reason we are so determined around the creation of new parks is that they're really the framework, the centre of any coherent long-term conservation strategy. You know, and that's not to say that there's not important conservation values in private land. It's not to say there's not important conservation lands in a whole range of different Crown tenures. But the places that are forever, the places where as a community we've actually made that call that this is so important that it needs to be protected in perpetuity, that's really that's the stuff that we've got in the bank. That's the stuff we can rely upon. So our work is very much divided into trying to make sure that no one mucks around with that stuff that's in the conservation bank. So we do a lot of work trying to protect our existing parks, but most importantly, thinking about what the next generation of parks is going to look like. So back to tonight, as I say, well, this is going to be in two parts. Initially with our presenters who will really talk to you about what's the nuts and bolts of this thing we're referring to as the Great Koala National Park, and then the candidates who'll give you an indication of where they stand in relation to this concept. Are they someone who would actually promote, pursue, support, or is it something that they have concerns with? So we need to understand that as well. No surprise to anyone that this has been timed to coincide with the New South Wales Upper House inquiry into the future of the forest products industry. And obviously the Great Koala National Park has some pretty major implications for those state forests that are within the ambit of the area we're suggesting should be set aside in perpetuity for conservation purposes. Unlike the inquiry, however, tonight's really not about the forestry industry. I'd like to say up front that MPA absolutely agrees that we need a vibrant forestry industry, but we also believe that that industry is based in well-managed and maintained and sustainable plantations. That the time for continuing to exploit, extract from some of our last remaining forest ecosystems has well and truly passed. You know, and I'm sure people tonight will be talking about things like the fire season we've just been through, the extinction crisis, but the reality is enough is enough. We're down to this diminishing return space and we can't actually afford more loss. Okay, sorry. Right. I do want to actually, when I'm talking about national parks as being forever and national parks being the centrepiece of, or one of the major parts of the framework for conservation, bizarrely, to be honest, but strangely encouragingly, this isn't just a concept that sits in the conservation movement anymore. I don't know if many of you will have noticed, but when our Prime Minister came back from a G20 meeting in the middle of last year, one of the things he came back into Sydney Airport with was the announcement that Australia had joined a thing called the High Ambition Coalition. And what the High Ambition Coalition is actually a commitment to use the protection of land and seas to halt biodiversity. And it sets a really high target. It talks about 30% of our land and seas being protected as the primary mechanism to stop the extinction crisis that's sweeping across the globe. I'm sure that the Prime Minister had lots of policy advisors telling him, no problem, at a national level we've got our 30%, largely in fact leaning upon Indigenous lands, but we all know that conservation actually happens at the bioregional level. It doesn't happen at the national level. It's what's unique about each of these bioregions. And in New South Wales, we've only just got to 10%. Now let's think about that. We've got to 10% of New South Wales in the period since the gazettal of Royal National Park in 1879. Barely 150 years later, we've just ticked over 10%. And we're talking about getting to 30% within the next 8 years. So that's a pretty remarkable target for a Prime Minister, particularly a Prime Minister from that side of politics, to be coming back into the country with. I'm absolutely convinced that the full ramifications of that commitment weren't known, but it's a very encouraging one for us to actually build on. And it's part of the case for why we simply can't afford, if we recognise that that's the sort of ambition that's required to get a genuine conservation outcome, we can't afford to let these opportunities pass. And the question we need to ask ourselves, you know, when we think about koalas, when we think about these Gondwanan forests of the Belgian Valley and that coast to Escarpment, could there ever be a landscape that was more deserving? Now, just a couple of nuts and bolts sort of pieces. One of the characteristics of the Great Koala National Park, and if you've seen any of the collateral on this, you know that it's about 315,000 hectares that we're talking about, of which 175 is state forest, 140,000 is national park. But it's actually a park that's already got really well-built bones. You know, you can see that list on the left-hand side of all the national parks, nature reserves, state conservation areas that go into that space. But it is a skeleton, and it's a skeleton that's somewhat disarticulated. There's lots of little pocket handkerchiefs that don't actually create a coherent landscape. And that's the reason why it needs the State Forest to actually bring that proposal to life. If we can get to that full 315 hectares though, what we actually have is a really rare circumstance in the New South Wales case and also nationally, which is a forest estate, a forest park, which is of a scale that it actually has the size to actually capture the full range of ecosystem processes, you know, from escarpment to sea, that whole range of things that go on as water, plants move through that different succession. But most importantly, it's large enough so that it's got the resilience to cope with the challenges that are coming. And in that, it joins a really small handful of reserves across New South Wales at the moment. You know, basically Kosciuszko, Southeast Forest, Greater Blue Mountains, World Heritage Areas, our parks that get up into that 2, 3, 500,000 hectares. They're really rare because they're the big special ones. So there is an extraordinary opportunity that's in front of us tonight. I'm so looking forward to hear what our speakers have to tell us about why it's actually an opportunity of substance, and even more looking forward to hearing how our potential political representatives see themselves as being involved in pursuing this concept. All right, now we are going to move now to, first speaker is James Sherwood from MPA. James.
Thanks, Gary. Thanks all for coming. Critical koala habitat in our public state forests are being logged. This is despite the devastation of the East Coast 2019-2020 bushfires, where 42% of forests in New South Wales burnt. We know logging burnt forests is extremely damaging ecologically. Fortunately, there are unburnt areas around Coffs, such as to the south, which are now considered important biodiversity arcs. For this reason, we need additional protection for North Coast forests more than ever. A few years ago, the National Parks Association launched the dream of creating a Great Koala National Park by shifting important koala habitat into the conservation estate. Today it is more relevant and more needed for koalas, but also all other plants and animals and ecosystem values it would protect. Koalas are now officially recognised as endangered by the Commonwealth Government. What more motivation is there to create an iconic park, which would save the koala and rival the Great Barrier Reef as a tourist attraction? Despite the many compelling reasons to create a Great Koala National Park, the New South Government has unfortunately failed to act. It has ignored its own recommendations. The New South Wales Government commissioned the Natural Resources Commission to prepare advice on how logging in state forests should change post-bushfires. The Commission's advice was leaked to the media late last year. Its findings are very powerful. It recommended a moratorium on logging in areas hit particularly hard by fires on the south coast and around Taree. It also recommended other safeguards before logging occurs. Instead of implementing the recommendations, the government has returned to logging our burnt forests. This includes areas the Commission identified as extreme risk. While the government has released a koala strategy just a few weeks ago, which does a lot of good things, it ignored the opportunity to protect koala habitat in our public state forests. It has also extended existing wood supply agreements with mills on the north coast. Most of the wood supply contracts were agreed to 20 years ago. They expire in 2023. Rather than extending them, there is an opportunity for re-evaluation to protect our public forests. However, right now, the government is looking to extend these contracts for another 5 years, without a thorough investigation of the risks. Extending the contracts is neither sustainable, ecologically, economically, or politically. To the contrary, new research by the University of Newcastle has found that by creating a Great Koala National Park, an extra 9,800 jobs would be created, plus an additional $330 million in wages for the region. This is great news for Coffs, and it means that forestry workers won't go without a job into the future. A just transition for forestry workers isn't a new idea. We have seen workers transition their skills into conservation jobs with the creation of other national parks elsewhere. There is a state election around the corner in March 2023. It is time all political parties adopt a can-do attitude to ending native forestry and creating the next generation of national parks. They must put forward a positive vision to save Australia's most iconic species, the koala. It's good to know that some politicians are already thinking about how we create a just transition for forestry workers into new jobs. The Greens on a state level have drafted a bill about this. I look forward to hearing any further innovative solutions that our federal candidates might share with us tonight. Just imagine a Great Koala National Park, which spans from the mountains to the coasts of our local region. The National Parks Association envisions the creation of a large-scale park that protects not just koalas, but a vast range of forest-dependent fauna, Gondwanian rainforests, remarkable coasts, and the rivers, creeks, and streams that bring our catchments to life. Thank you.
Thanks, James. I might just mention that James and Danielle started as NPA's new conservation officers barely a fortnight ago, and I can't imagine a more remarkable start for a new role than pulling together this forum as they have done over the last few days, or last couple of weeks. All right. Our first speaker tonight is going to be Dylan Pugh. Dylan's one of the most renowned conservation advocates in Australia, with a particular passion for the landscapes and seas of the northeastern New South Wales. He's an artist with remarkable talent for connecting people with nature, and his conservation advocacy combines scientific rigour with an unparalleled knowledge of the natural heritage and history of the northeast. And I've got to say, I've actually watched that happen in a minister's office where the then newly minted Minister Keynes sort of pulled a whole group of us in to talk about forests and got the history of northeastern forest off Dylan in about sort of 15 minutes, and I could just see his brain rolling around. It was wonderful. All right, Dylan.
So before I start, I'd just like to acknowledge the National Parks Association. I was involved in the Terania Creek blockade in 1979, and I then joined the National Parks Association, and they helped me prepare my first national park proposal up in the Upper Clarence, and I wrote it all out by hand 3 times, and they typed it all up for me at least twice, and so finally got this proposal, and it's all now national park. So I just want to acknowledge them for that. So I want to make a case for changing the name of the proposed Great Koala National Park. We all know about the plight of koalas. On the north coast, they were reduced by half over the 20 years before the 2019-20 fires. And then a third were lost in the fires, and they are now listed as endangered and could be extinct in the wild by 2050 if we don't do something. There's no doubt the proposed Great Koala National Park encompasses the largest and most important area of koala habitat existing in New South Wales. And I've assessed the whole of New South Wales to say that, and that the highest altitudes and rainfalls of the Dorrigo Plateau is their most important climate change refugia for the future. But you're forgetting something. The proposal is equally important for the Hastings River mouse, which has been listed as nationally endangered for a lot longer, and 82% of its known localities were burnt in the 2019-20 fires. Surely it's more deserving of recognition. And let's not forget about the nationally endangered spotted-tailed quail, giant barred frog, rufous scrubbird and Clarence River cod, and the nationally vulnerable greater glider, yellow-bellied glider, long-nosed potteroo, brush-tailed rock wallaby and peppered tree frog. All of these have important habitat in the proposal and were identified as requiring urgent management intervention by the Commonwealth after the 2019-20 fires, because a lot of their habitat was burnt. So if you don't want to be accused of being speciesist, you should change the name of the Great Koala, to the Great Koala, Hastings River mouse, spotted-tailed quail, giant barred frog, rufous scrubbird, Clarence River cod, greater glider, yellow-bellied glider, long-nosed potteroo, brush-tailed rock wallaby and peppered tree frog National Park, to name just a few. It's a bit of a mouthful, but it's PC. And as you just heard, you know, the University of Newcastle study found the Great Koala National Park would, over the next 15 years, generate additional regional economic output of 1.2 billion and create more than 9,800 extra full-time jobs compared to logging. So maybe you should call it the Great Tourist Park. But there are other economic benefits. We're experiencing a climate crisis. Droughts, heat waves, wildfires and floods are all increasing in frequency and intensity. We know we need to urgently reduce our carbon emissions and move to net zero as soon as possible. But to get there, we also need to increase the removal of carbon from the atmosphere. And the only proven and reliable method of carbon capture and storage is trees. Worldwide, they take up a third of our carbon emissions. Logging has more than halved the carbon stored in our local forests. If we allow them to recover, they can regain that carbon and we can reduce emissions by stopping cutting them down. A recent study of the South East Forest found that by stopping logging of state forests, they would sequester an additional million tonnes of carbon dioxide each year, as well as produce a net economic benefit of 60 million per annum. The Great Koala National Park is not far off that. Maybe you could call it the Great Carbon Park. And if you live from Grafton down to Iluka and down the coast from there to Coffs Harbour and Sawtell, you are drinking koala DNA. Your water comes from the Neboida River via Shannon Creek Dam or the Aurora River via Karangi Dam. In their catchments, there are 34,000 hectares of national parks and 48,000 hectares of state forests, most of which is now proposed as national park. In the state forest, they are now allowed to log to within 5 metres of headwater streams, releasing thousands of tonnes of eroded soil into your drinking water every year. And the thirsty regrowth releases less than half the water to the streams as does old growth. The national parks, on the other hand, are recovering from past logging. They're repairing areas, regaining their ability to filter overland flows, and maturing trees releasing more water into streams and your dams every year. It's not just here. If you live from Bellingen down to Urunga, your water comes from the Bellingen River Borefield. From Barrowville and Maxville down to Nambucca Head, your water comes from the Nambucca River Borefield. All these catchments have within this proposal to a degree, so protecting these forests protects those catchments. In this climate crisis, it's time to increase the protection of your catchments, improve the quality of their waters and increase their water yields during droughts. If you pay water rates, you know how much water costs, but in a drought, water is priceless. Maybe you could call it the Great Water Park. So, to stop discrimination, I think you need to change the name of your proposal to be inclusive of all its values. If that's too hard, you can just call for an end of all logging of public native forests. So, given I don't have long left, I'd like to focus on the current situation. We're in a federal election. In 2018, Scott Morrison signed away federal obligations for threatened species and matters of national environmental significance by extending the North East New South Wales Regional Forest Agreement indefinitely, able to be rolled over every 5 years forever. There was no new assessment, no reassessment of the needs of the increasing numbers of federally listed threatened species, and no assessment whatsoever of the increasing impacts of climate heating. He relied on a regional assessment I was involved in back in 1997 and 98. Back then, the outcome was political. We never agreed to the Regional Forest Agreement. We achieved a doubling of the national parks in this region, but it was less than half of what the science and national reserve criteria said that we needed. We were promised there would be a new assessment in 20 years. We were lied to. We're awaiting the court judgment on our challenge to Morrison's extension with no new assessment of climate change, threatened species and old growth. In this campaign, he has promised he, quote, won't support any shutdowns of native forestry, end quote. No meaningful action on climate change and no Great Koala National Park by any name. The state is no better. They refuse to implement the advice of the National Resource Commission to triple the retention of large old trees to compensate for the losses of low-bearing trees in 2019-20 wildfires. They refuse to even consider koalas on state forests in the koala strategy, and they're about to extend the wood supply agreements at current levels for another 5 years until 2028, despite losing millions of trees because of wildfires, droughts and dieback. They will give these promises of public resources to loggers for free, but you will have to pay them millions of dollars. This is the sawmills you have to pay in compensation if you want your park. New South Wales Upper House is holding an inquiry into long-term sustainability and future of the timber industry and timber and forest products industry in Coffs Harbour Council chambers tomorrow. We're holding a rally outside from 10:30 to 11:30. Please come to show both state and federal governments we want our public forests protected. Thank you.
Thanks, Dylan. New South Wales, a few weeks ago actually, tipped over its 900th National Park, and I think after this we might be looking at National Park number 901. All right, so our next speaker is Mark Graham. Mark's an ecologist who's lived, worked and played in Gumbungia country for most of his life. For the last couple of years he's run Belgian nature tours, not Neligan nature tours, taking people deep into our globally significant local forests. He wants to manifest a future filled with abundant life by working with people and organisations to better understand, protect and expand our forests and our parts of life support systems. I've done enough of a twist there, so I'm just going to pass over to Mark. Thank you.
Thanks, Gary. I'd like to acknowledge we're pretty much in the middle of the amazing Gumbungia nation and pay the deepest of respects to all in that nation, all the custodians, and recognise that it's a nation of plenty, and it was recognised through the Dreaming as a place of immense plenty. And it's a place of incredible productivity and cleanliness, and it remains such, unlike so much of our country. I'd like to also recognise that to the north is the Yagle Nation, with some areas of their nation at the edges of the Great Koala National Park, and to the south, the Dunghutti Nation. I'm going to talk a bit about the values and to celebrate what it is that we're the custodians of in this region. We really are amidst one of the world's most astonishing natural heritage legacies. We dwell within a landscape that is truly astonishing and is significant at the global scale, and that's evidenced by the World Heritage status of the Gondwana rainforests, which are interspersed within the proposed Great Koala National Park. We have literally some of the most ancient forests on the planet. We have some of the cleanest rivers. We have some of the most astonishingly diverse tall eucalypt forests across all space and time. Going to our north, in the northern parts of the Coffs Harbour local government area, in the Corindi Valley, are areas of eucalypt forests that are significantly more diverse than equivalent areas in the Blue Mountains. There are over 30 microbat species in those forests, which means that they're amongst the most diverse assemblages of microbats, so these beautiful little creatures that are a key part of the health of our forests. Australia doesn't have that many microbats, so in one valley to the northwest of Woolgoolga is a significant proportion of Australia's microbats. I've been lucky to have lived most of my life in this country, and I relish every day in this country. It nourishes and sustains my very being, and it sustains our economy. Our forests, our national parks, and our other public forests sustain our economy. We're essentially a service-based economy, and the major pillars of our economy are health and tourism. And visitors from around Australia and those who are returning from around the world come to this country and they see beauty and they see cleanliness, and they want that. That is the product that people from around Australia and around the world want. They will pay money to come here. They will provide employment for our youth and sustenance for our economy. It's a significant proportion of our regional product that comes from tourism. But as well as that, we derive significant economic benefit from our agricultural industry and from our fishing industry. And each of these industries is critically reliant upon the health of our forests, particularly, as Dylan has mentioned, because of water supply. So our agricultural industry, which is in the order of a couple of $100 million of gross regional product per annum, all of that is dependent upon water security, so clean, reliable water. And sadly, as a consequence of global heating, so much of Australia is warming up and it's demonstrably drying out, particularly some of our critical food bowls in places like the Murray-Darling Basin. So we've got an opportunity within our region to protect all of our public forests for water security and for the sustenance of our industries, critically our tourism and nature-based tourism industries, but also our agricultural industry, which particularly in the case of our organic and cottage, I guess small-scale production industries, is growing rapidly across our region, and most of those enterprises are deriving the water that they require for their productivity from national parks or parts of the proposed Great Koala National Park. That's life support. That's water and that's food. And in an increasingly uncertain national and global climate, the best thing that we can do for our economy and our future is to protect our forests. And our forests have demonstrably remained wet through tens of millions of years of deep time. That is why they are the most ancient, amongst the most ancient forests surviving on our planet. They literally are self-sustaining ecosystems. They generate rainfall across our catchment headwaters, across the headwaters of the Bellinger, the Nimboida, the Arara in particular, and it's well over 100,000 residents across our region that derive drinking water, so key life support, from these forests. And every time we allow our forests to be industrially logged, we're eating away at our water security and we're eating away at our economic security. It's lunacy. And the best thing that we can do, and the cheapest and most cost-effective way of ensuring a future for our people and our economy, is to protect our forests and indeed to expand them, because one thing we do really well in this region, because of reliable moisture and an incredibly productive climate, is we grow trees really well. And there is a lot of land that is not serving its best and most productive purpose. And in an escalating climate crisis, the best thing we can do atop protecting our forests is to expand them. And that will deliver us into a much more secure economic future and into a future in which our life support systems are not just maintained but expanded. It's a pathway of life, and it's a pathway that we all need to tread.
Thanks, Mark. And all that talk, oops, wrong way, of water made me realise we need something other than a list up on the board. Okay, our next speaker is Graham Tupper. Graham's a lifelong conservationist. He was a member of NPA decades ago in the fight for Wallamai and has since worked with the Australian Conservation Foundation in a policy and national partnership roles for more than 12 years with Don Henry. This includes working on tourism and conservation policy. Graham.
G'day, I'm just going to try something, introduce another voice into this forum, see if this works. I use this on my nocturnal tours for people to guess what scary animal this might be. And I get all sorts of answers. And very few people know it's a koala. One of our nocturnal tours in the gardens recently, we played that at a point on the main path. And guess what? We got a call back right above us. Anyway, I support the creation of a Great Koala Park for two reasons. First, its value in connecting and protecting prime habitat for koala and other animals, all the ones that have been mentioned. And second, for its huge tourism benefits that this will bring to the region. Now, my history actually, while it's mainly as a conservationist, in more recent years has become as a tourism operator. And before that, in tourism policy. So, in my view, to understand what the value of nature-based tourism is to essentially think about what we enjoy about life when we peel ourselves away from the screens and venture outside. And my passion is to do that with younger people, to peel them away from the screens and see outside. So my understanding has grown out of a long personal history in this region, walking its mountains, its rivers, its beaches, and my journeys around this country to Cape York and the Kimberley and other places, helping to promote nature-based tourism, setting up new nature-based tourism ventures in partnership with other people, and in the most recent 3 years before moving back to Coffs to run a wildlife tour business. I want to focus tonight on a big, bold tourism pitch for this region to go with the big, bold idea of an overarching Great Koala National Park. But to expand on what the background to this is, in nature tourism policy, my involvement goes back 20 years to some collaborative research between Australia's peak tourism associations, conservation bodies, national parks and wildlife services, tourism services in each state, in what was then, in 2006, called the Natural Tourism Partnerships Action Plan. And that action plan still has a lot of very valid findings in it. The interesting thing about that action plan was it spanned the political spectrum from right and left. And the idea of nature-based tourism, therefore, it's not so new, but what it's really uniquely about is it's supported by people and organisations and governments of all political persuasions in the main. It's an aspect of the tourism industry which, by all indicators that are available, is on a steady long-term growth path, both in its popularity with people and its value to regional economies. Tasmania is a prime example of just that. And nature-based tourism operators like me in the last few years realise that our businesses and our livelihoods are built on conserving and managing these natural assets. So my wildlife tour business in Canberra involved guiding hundreds of people, mainly international visitors and some Aussie interstate visitors, to nature reserves near Canberra. In my market research, which was subsequently reinforced in visitor feedback, it became clear to me the main reason travellers chose to come on my tours was to encounter the wildlife in their natural habitat. And this was reflected directly in the more than 150 five-star reviews that they wrote on TripAdvisor and on Airbnb experiences in that period. This helped to take my startup business from zero to the #1 traveller-rated guided tour experience in Canberra in the space of 2 years. At the centre of its popularity was that experience of wildlife, and at the centre of that, it was one particular animal in particular. Guess what? The koala, which you could guarantee to see in the Tidbinbilla Nature Reserve. My tour business was part of a network with other operators around the world under the umbrella of the Intrepid Travel Group. Many other operators in that network were so envious of my business because I was able to offer an endless supply on Instagram and Facebook of these very cute, cuddly creatures and all the stories that went along with them. But here is the thing, the most important thing. My tour business was only made possible, and the experience of those visitors so rewarding, because I could benefit from a park system and a wildlife protection program that resulted from the vision and forward thinking of successive ACT governments over decades of all political persuasions. This happened long before I came along to start a business. Unfortunately, my business relied mostly on international visitors, and COVID put a dramatic halt to that in 2020. And in the hiatus, I saw the light and I felt the warmth, and I returned to my home country of Coffs Harbour, and here I am. So now I'm semi-retired, which is just code for I just work without pay as a local volunteer. But I've been using that wildlife tour experience to help develop some new habitat tours and nocturnal wildlife encounters at the nearby Coffs Botanic Gardens. Remarkably, and you're all welcome to come and join one of those tours if you can book at Coffs by Nature, remarkably it's a place where koala and gliders and even apex predators like the powerful owl can be encountered in the very heart of this city. Even this modest initiative has demonstrated a great interest and demand for these types of experiences. Now, I want to move on to a big, bold proposition that the Great Koala Park could become to the Coffs Coast region what the Great Barrier Reef is to Cairns, what the Great Wildlife Parks are to Kenya, what the Great Walks are to Tasmania and New Zealand, and especially if we have our own great escarpment walk through the Great Koala National Park, which is an idea I understand has already been explored. I think such a Great Koala Park, building on the other natural assets of this region, will rise above, like its local seagulls on the thermals around here, to being an iconic drawcard, especially to interstate international visitors. Sorry. I'm very passionate about this, selling Coffs and the Great Koala Park. And if you think I'm overstating this case, I want you to remember that going back into the 1960s and 70s, before the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park, it was proposed in '67 to actually mine coral at Ellison Reef. It was between '68 and 1970 that six exploratory holes were drilled to search for oil and gas. There was a great push to develop the reef for oil and gas. Fortunately, there was a growing public concern. Fortunately, that turned into the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park Act of 1975, and the park began to be created. But let me ask you now, if you were to put your hat on, or going back to history, how many people would stand up now to propose that the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park be scrapped in favour of allowing hundreds of oil and gas fields to be built? Now, on a more local scale, and forgive me for going over time, I want to the Dorrigo Plateau is a place where I come from a farming family. And in my lifetime, with a farming family at Dorrigo, there's been a great deal of change and the creation of a whole series of national parks. But my grandfather, Clary, came from a farming family, and he took me and my sisters in the very early days of the creation of Dorrigo Park to a place called the Glade, picnic area, which was just a little grass area with a couple of tables and some mud tracks. And the point I want to make is that he's long departed, but he could never have imagined how popular the Dorrigo National Park Visitor Centre would be, how overcrowded the car park would be in holiday times. That kind of thinking back then was unimaginable. So could it be that in 20 or 30 years' time, when other people look back to the 2020s and ask, who were those people who had such a big, bold and enduring vision to make all this happen? Who saw that well down the track? And then to wrap up, thank you for the time. The Coffs Council has made some progress recently in securing eco-destination status for this region, which is a good step forward. Very impressive, first in New South Wales. The Coffs Coast website says that we are the region, the only place in New South Wales where the Great Dividing Range meets the ocean and has a rich ecosystem of national parks, reserves and protected Solitary Islands Marine Park. I think that it's feasible within a few years, with the creation of this big, bold park, combined with the right investment in appropriate visitor infrastructure, that can be updated to say the Coffs Coast region is also the only place in Australia surrounded by healthy populations of koala and other wildlife which are protected in a huge, well-connected habitat called the Great Koala Park. That would go a long way to advancing that eco-destination meaning. To sum up, as a returned and proud born from a local farming family, who went on a big journey of tourism around Australia and back again, I want to boast, hopefully one day soon, there are other destinations in New South Wales and in Queensland which have marine parks, World Heritage listed forests and koala habitat close to their coastal cities and towns. There is only one place in Australia where there is all of this and a large and healthy population of koala protected in a huge linked up world-class world habitat known as the Great Koala National Park. And guess where that place is? Right here.
As always, there's a little bit of tolerance for passion. And I got to say, I mean, for me, there's three key pillars to conservation and to protected area management. One's having the good science to help you figure out where those places are that most need protection. Another's professional management of those places to make sure they stay protected. But the third pillar, and it's fantastic to see two of our speakers here engaged in it, is the people who can help connect the community with that nature. Because it's from that connection that we actually build the momentum from generation to generation that means that these places are truly protected in perpetuity. So I think Graham needed a bit of an opportunity here because it is such a critical part of the conservation puzzle. Okay, look, thanks everybody. We're now going to move to the second part of the evening, which is the opportunity for your candidates to reflect on their views on the Great Koala National Park and the forest estate of their region. We're simply going to do this alphabetically, but I've got to say the three folk who are here tonight gets first Guernsey, and I'll read the statements out from the two who weren't able to after that. So I'm going to start by inviting Simon to come and talk to you. Simon's the Liberal Democrats candidate, and please welcome him. Sorry, folks. I should say, just to reiterate, I'd ask that we don't ask questions of the candidates on the way through. We'll actually do that as a panel event at the end of the evening.
Well, thanks very much. And thanks, Gary, for that. So not a speaker. This is the first time in politics. I'm a local builder actually. I've got 4 children. We live locally here. So, look, where do I start? A bit about me. I grew up in a rural, well, a bush property that was completely surrounded by national parks. Our family still owns that. It's completely surrounded by the Wollemi National Park actually, and to this day we pump the water out of the river and into our water tanks, and that's what we use. So, look, national parks and conservation of forests has always been a big part of me growing up, and since I've been an adult. My grandfather grew up on the property that his family had in the Hawkesbury since it was the very first convict land grant that was given to his great whatever grandfather, and the property that I grew up on was quite close to that. So that was the property he'd had for the last well, it'd be 60 years ago now, which was just down the road from the original property. So a really big connection to that area. My grandfather and my whole family were great lovers of the Aboriginal people of that area. My grandfather knew part of the language and had a great respect, a deep respect. They often told us what they'd learnt from the Aboriginal people and how they really wouldn't have, through the generations, survived without that connection. Obviously, it's been devastating what's happened over the generations, but that wasn't everyone. So. My grandfather always taught us growing up the way to care for the bush. We were always taught from a very young age. We burnt cold burned in the mosaic sort of pattern that my grandfather had sort of told me that was passed on from the original custodians of the land. And so yeah, look, I guess what I'm saying is that national parks are very dear to my heart, and so is a sustainability of these things. Now, a bit about myself. I'm like I said, I'm a builder, and part of my building focus has always been sustainability in housing. I guess as part of that, I'm a realist. So I think that we all live in houses. So there's a real push and pull between the practicalities of life and preserving what we have, and I think that absolutely preserving it should come as the first option. But we also live in a world where we have to do the best that we can to improve things and make sure that what bothers me about politics. So I'll get into that. What drew me to the Liberal Democrats, besides their strong focus on personal freedom and liberties, they've been very much against the mandates and things like that are eating into the personal sovereignty of people. That's dear to my heart. But what really I like about them politically is that they're all about smaller government and localised government. So the problem I see with issues like this is that there's warring sides, and it seems to be polarising. People war against each other, and then it all goes up the chain to Canberra, and the people there are very much concerned about satisfying everyone. So what they do is they make trade-offs. They say, okay, you guys, you can have that over there, and you guys can have that over there. And really the outcome isn't good for anyone. They might say, okay, we'll lock up this much land, and you guys can completely strip that land, and the net profit of it is not much. Where I see the benefit or the way forward is for things like this. People need to get together, and without the political warring, need to figure out solutions to these problems. So, okay, thank you. In a nutshell, what I'm about is, or what I'd like to see is community groups like this really work through these issues. I'm 100% for the formation of national parks. I think that the focus should be on them being very well maintained. As someone who's lived in the area surrounded by the biggest national park, I think in Australia, maybe more. It's a very big national park anyway. One problem that was always there is the lack of management of those assets. So I think that we should have a lot of resource and focus on the management and the maintaining of those assets. I think the tourism industry is a great way to do that because it generates an economy around it. Look, just briefly, I also think that on the flip side, what bothers me as a builder is that, I mean, a lot of the timber products that we use in Australia is labelled legally milled or legally sourced, which basically means that they didn't kill anyone when they were pulling it out of the Malaysian rainforest. So I think that we need to work out solutions to this, not just have winner takes all, but I think we really need to figure out ways to balance and to have really richly protected assets, but also work in practical ways to improve farming, to improve the timber industry, and really bring about things that are going to make a benefit overall. I don't want to see just one little part of it protected and another part traded off. So, yeah, thanks very much for your time, and yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Thanks, Simon. The next speaker I want to call to the podium is Kaz Heiss, who's an independent candidate for this area.
Thanks very much. Thank you. I don't know if Auntie Jenny's still here, but thank you for your lovely welcome to country, to acknowledge the Gumbaynggirr Nation that we meet upon today. Thank you to the National Parks Association for holding tonight. It is really important that we come together to have these discussions, and it's amazing to be in the presence of people like Darlene Pugh and others who have spent their life researching and understanding the beautiful natural environment that we live in. But I'm here to talk about a drier topic and how it integrates into this issue, and that's the federal election, which is coming up in a very short space of time, 3.5 weeks actually, and way less than that for pre-polls. I think it's about the 9th of May, the pre-polls open. So the fuse is lit, and what I want to say to you is politics, as we know it in the federal arena, is broken. The business as usual model that we've been working in for all of these years since Federation is broken. I remember when I was very young, I read a David Suzuki book, and it's, gosh, when I was very young, it's going back quite a few years now, but he said at that time that we're all in a fast train and we're headed for the edge of a cliff, and our politicians are more interested in talking about who's sitting in what seat. And we're still in that position today. How many people here have watched recently Don't Look Up on Netflix? I certainly did. And sometimes I feel like it's the reality that we're unfortunately living in. So we've got to get smart. It's been a conservative seat here in Cowper for a very long time, since Federation. We know that we've got a lot of things to do to turn that around. We know that the big issues of climate and environment have not been attended to as they should have been, and hence we're in a situation where we have had wildfires, where we do have multiple species coming to extinction, and where we do have the threat of flood and other climate change warming upon us now. So we need to take action, and we've got 3.5 weeks to do that. Another 3 years is not good enough. So we have to get smart as a community right now, and how are we going to get there? So I'd say to you, we've got the experts in the room and we've heard from them tonight. We need to start listening to the science, and we need to get smart about how we address legislation and how we bring bills before the Parliament and how we vote for those bills to actually get real change so they're not blocked and held up in the Parliament. And currently the best climate bill in the federal Parliament has been brought to that Parliament by the independent Zali Steggall. I would support that bill on behalf of our community, because I, in the last 8 weeks, have been speaking to 1,000 people a week in Cowper, in various community groups and forums, and what am I hearing matters to people the most? I'm hearing we're not getting real action on climate. We have no integrity in politics. Now, isn't that interesting? We've had the current government in for 10 years, and where's the incumbent tonight listening to community? Not here. We've got an empty seat. At the pub, actually, you're right, the Sawtell pub, pulling beers, and I'm not making that up, that's true. You probably know that. But what I will say is, what's the difference? What's the difference with the major parties and what we've got now? I'd say to you, party politicians are interested in quite a few things before community. First and foremost, they're interested in the power of the party and keeping that party alive at all costs. Secondly, that's very much coordinated with that is their big corporate donors. And we know in Australia, It's no surprise that the organisation and the industries that get the most government subsidies in this country is the fossil fuel industries, $11.6 billion in the last calendar year. It's not good enough, and these are choices that our politicians have made, choices to be in the pockets of big industry and not choosing to listen to our scientists, like the very clever ones we have here tonight. And the other thing party politicians are interested in is their career as politicians. Not good enough. Where does the community come in that? Fourth or fifth down the line. We've got 3.5 weeks, the fuse is lit. I am very happy as a leader, as someone who is qualified, who is very happy to speak up on your behalf, who actually never saw myself as a career politician, but feel compelled to do so on behalf of our region, to actually rattle the cage, to sit there on the crossbench and consult with you as every important issue like this is brought before our community, based on science, based on economics, and we've heard tonight the economics is way more sensible to be basing that on science going forward, based on the things that we need for our future, our children's future, our grandchildren's future, if hopefully we have those, hopefully I have those in the future. But yeah, I just want to say to you, please talk amongst yourselves, talk to your friends, talk to your families, think about this as a community. It's time to get strategic, it's time to change things up, and it's time to actually have the hard discussions and hold this government accountable. Thank you.
Thanks, Kaz. Our next speaker is Tim Knott from the Greens.
Thank you. I'd first like to start by saying thank you to the Gumbaynggirr Nation for looking after the koala, for being custodians of this land. We need to learn from them about this issue. I'm running for the Greens, and it's great to see so many people here, including our guests, and certainly it's changed over the years. Working as an environmental scientist in the Cowper area for so many years, it's been disappointing as the species have dwindled and the management has been poor and the species have been forgotten, with the number of threatened species increasing almost daily. We're well over 1,000 at this point. The koala is an opportunity to save all of those species that were discussed previously. The Greens, at all levels of government, at local level, with Jonathan Cassell, who's been championing the Great Koala National Park in council here at Coffs Harbour, at state government level, particularly through Kate Fairman, and thank you, James, for that reference previously, where we are looking at creating a policy to transition forestry workers into other industries and into other jobs, because the Greens care about people. And now, at the upper level of government, at the federal level, if we put the Greens into the balance of power through either myself in the lower house or David Shoebridge in the Senate, we can make this happen. The Great Koala National Park will happen, and we're going to be champions of that. And your support here today is just another step towards that. The Greens need the balance of power to get the other people in the decision-making process to understand that people should come first, that the community should be listened to. Over the years, as Kaz says, I've certainly been disappointed in the way that politicians seem to make decisions biasing corporations. And it's one of the reasons why I'm with the Greens, because we don't accept corporate donations blanket. And we've set up a process where no one person can ever change that, because there is pressure at the top level. I support the Great Koala National Park and will champion it to make sure it's enshrined in law forever. Let's look at the risks to the koala and all those other magical species. The main risk at this point is climate change. It has been underestimated, it has been obfuscated by our local member, continuing to this day. This is really disappointing, but for me, the number of people who have contacted me about the climate change issue as the number one issue for them today is outstanding, amazing, and gives me that strength. It's fantastic that we have realised that this is the number one issue that covers not just the threatened species, but our education, our health, our infrastructure, our livelihoods. So we need to deal with that as an issue, and to deal with that, we need to remove corporate influence out of governance. And the Greens are planning to do that all the way at every single level of government. This area is certainly something that I love, and I appreciated Mark's words before about being invigorated in this forest. And certainly recently I haven't been into the forest as much because I've been doing other things, and I need to go back there to re-energise myself and see the reasons why I'm working so hard towards our community. We have a special place here in Coffs Harbour. We have a marine park grading all the way up to the escarpment and into the hills. This gives us an opportunity. This gives us an opportunity to protect the koala and the other species with that habitat, with that topography that will buffer those species from a changing climate. So this is the ideal proposal in my eyes in regards to a long-term solution to protect the koala. And also, something that's close to my heart is we need to grow jobs in this area. This proposal has both. I don't know how come the current government has not got on board. What a great proposal. I do like the name, Great Koala National Park, but I was thinking if we have a centre there, maybe we could call it, and I believe, because I was trying to learn new Gumbaynggirr words, I believe the word for koala is Dungir, and maybe we could call it the Dungir Centre. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim. All right, now, this is the bit of the evening where I'm going to feel a little bit uncomfortable because I'm using my voice to express what some other people have said. But I'm going to read out the statements from Faye Aspitios and from Keith McCullen. So I'll start with Faye's statement. Faye is the One Nation candidate for Cowper. She worked in the area of environmental monitoring for 10 years after completing her Bachelor of Chemical Engineering. Faye chose to work in this area because she cares about the environment and wanted to be actively involved in preserving it. She believes that the Mid-North Coast is the best part of Australia and wants to see its pristine beauty maintained. She wishes the National Parks Association of New South Wales every success with the proposed Koala Park venture in Coffs Harbour and trusts that the community will make the right decisions about its future development. Faye is grateful for the opportunity to provide some input and is sorry that she could not make the meeting this evening. She has always loved koalas and knows that the majority of Australians also hold a soft spot for our iconic koalas. Okay. Personality change, different person. I'm now Keith McCullen, speaking for Keith McCullen, Labor candidate. I support the Great Koala National Park, and Labor has a strong commitment to the Great Koala National Park. Its creation has been Labor Party policy since 2014. Labor took the policy to the 2015 New South Wales election and again to the 2019 New South Wales election. Today, the Great Koala National Park is a key priority of the New South Wales Labor platform, which states, and it's a quote, "An elected Labor government will continue its legacy of national park creation. Labor will direct the National Parks and Wildlife Service to develop funded reserves proposals and a plan for progressing the implementation of the New South Wales National Parks Establishment Plan. Our first priority is the creation of the Great Koala National Park on the state's north coast." I do feel like reading that one again. Our first priority is the creation of the Great Koala National Park on the state's north coast. The Great Koala National Park is strongly supported by our local Labor branches and by our local Labor politicians, including Susan Genvie, Councillor for Nambucca Council, and Tony Judge, Councillor for Coffs Harbour City Council. And that completes our candidate presentations. Thank you so much to everyone who's attended tonight and who's actually been prepared to stand here and talk to us about this great concept. We now have, I'll just going to check. Okay, we've got about 15 to 20 minutes for questions from the floor. Happy for people to direct them to a specific person on the panel, or you may want to frame them around seeking a response from more than one person or from the panel in general. What I must ask, though, is that people do two things. The first is to ask your questions in a respectful way, and I would hope, in fact, in a friendly way. And the second is, could you please frame it as a question? It's really tempting in this sort of situation for us to stand up and do what I'm doing, which is sort of launch forth, but this is really about hearing what these people have to say. So think about what you want to ask them to reflect on, to comment on. Now, I'm going to have... Yes, please. Okay, so James has got the mobile piece. So if I could just get people to put your hands up and indicate if you want to ask a question. Ishbel, would you mind being a second pair of eyes to just sort of spot people in the crowd? And come on, you've got to make it worthwhile for us to be spotting people in the crowd. Yep, here we go.
Yes. Hi. Thank you very much. Look, I live 6 k's up on the hill in Karangi, which is west of here directly, and I'm feeling that I'm at the sort of pointy end of some of the issues that have been discussed tonight, because I got in the post a letter from the Forestry Corporation saying that they're going to log parcels 11 and 12 of the Arara East State Forest, and it's going to be done by Queensland Commodity Exports Proprietary Limited. I haven't lived in Coffs for a long time, but I'm myself and say 5 or 6 neighbours, our land is either zoned primary or secondary koala habitat by the council, and there's numerous sightings of koalas. You can hear them at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, and so we're directly adjoining that parcel of land that they're going to log. Look, to cut to the chase, my question is there any advice that I could get on strategies for myself and my neighbours to respond to this letter, which there's an option to do as a kind of questionnaire that we have to fill out. But is there any sort of coherent group or body that I could get behind or get the support of, or have advocacy that moves me beyond just an individual?
Sorry, folks. I know this is going to be a bit awkward, but if panel members want to respond, can I get you to come up and use the...
Sure. Yep. Is that clear enough?
It really is, and there are a lot of people who share your concerns about our public native forests. Your position in the landscape is atop the Great Escarpment, and the Great Escarpment is like the spine of the Great Koala National Park.
Well, could I just add
Yep.
one?
Please do.
Partly, but yes. And the thing that if you look on Google Earth is that you've got the national park up to the west, the north, sorry, and then these little pockets of land that my 40 acres is part of, and my neighbours is part of, and then you've got this parcel which joins up through towards the Karangi Dam as a coherent corridor. So if they're going to log that,
You're literally in the landscape that holds it all together at a real pinch point in the escarpment, in the corridor that extends along the Great Escarpment. Quolls move through there. There are still yellow-bellied gliders in the hills around you, hopefully even on your property still. We know for a fact via Coffs Council's 30 years or so of research that your landscape is critically significant to the health of the city's koalas. They repopulate the Coffs Creek Basin down the riparian corridors that come down off the escarpment. So at that really big picture level, taking out forest cover in that landscape is really, really bad news. And the ripples from that, the consequences of industrially logging within that landscape, extend for kilometres up and down our escarpment and prevent the movement of species seasonally and in response to a warming climate. These are big picture issues that really need to be brought to the fore. They're not necessarily going to stop an operation, but understanding your position in the landscape and just how important it is to the whole is one reason, very, very important reason to be bringing forward. And I've done research in your hills and I can totally vouch for their incredible biodiversity values. So retaining all of that forest cover and expanding it through the gaps that exist there is key. So not just kind of saying don't industrially log, but this is a key landscape for expanding our corridors.
Can anyone, the NCA or any other group advocate for not doing this?
What we'll do is I'll get your contact details after this. It's one of the consistent things about the current New South Wales government is that to the extent that they listen to community, the closer you are to the issue, and so an adjoining neighbour has in fact a much stronger voice than I do as someone representing a statewide organisation. So what we'll do is help you with the sort of information to bring to the fore. Just to really emphasise what Mark just said though, I mean, if you were to ask me what's the single biggest failing in environmental management across New South Wales, I'd say that it's our environmental planning system is totally incapable of dealing with the impact of proposals at the landscape level and cumulative impacts. We've got this reductionist approach that's sort of to ask, well, how many threatened species are we going to lose in this tiny little patch? And doesn't actually ask, have we totally buggered up a whole landscape by taking that patch out? Our system is terrible at this, and we really need significant reform to get to the point where we can actually give the sort of emphasis to your patch that it needs because it's one of the linchpins. Yep. So, yeah, Dylan, and then Tim.
So you said it was Queensland commodity exports. So is it plantation, do you know, or is it native forest? But I mean, it's an interesting fact because they're going to export it overseas, and we've got this timber inquiry going on at the moment in town, and the big issue that all the industry players are saying, it's timber shortage, we need to log more and more and more, and we bloody export it overseas as whole logs. I mean, really, isn't that just absolutely disgusting? I'm shocked, really, that we'll allow that to go on. And it's been going on around here for a long time, been transported up to Brisbane and shipped off. A lot of your plantations they've done that with, and they say we need timber. I mean, I think it's disgusting, but I just want to say too that the North East Forest Alliance, when we started, we were a combination of a range of groups across North East New South Wales, and we were successful. We worked together. Now, look, our infrastructure is not so good anymore, but around Coffs, there's lots of forest groups at the moment, and you've got the Bellinger Environment Centre, but there's a conglomerate forest group, there's a Pine Creek forest group, Tucker's Knob forest group, so if there's a lot of you concerned about the same issue, you're most effective working with each other. So, I suggest you start your group up there and you get in touch with those other groups and try to work together. And that's how you're going to achieve what you want. Thanks.
Yeah, I'd really like to address this. Just I've been in a similar situation with this kind of thing, and look, this is where the crux of the matter lies. Is that, and this is what we're trying to do, is bring governance down to a local level. The problem with large centralised government is that these things got fought over not on a local level but on a state level or a federal level, and there's no community consultation. So, what the philosophy of what we're trying to do is bring self-governance, which really means local governments. So that means that if a patch of bush is going to be logged, the community has to be consulted and involved, and it's on a local level. So these decisions get made on a local level. I'd like to see advisory boards made locally so that people in the area can consult and have a connection between local government and up the chain. And so that local groups have a direct link to government. Self-governance in the sense that the local community makes the decisions, and these things have to be nutted out on a local level instead of trying to advocate to external government. So I think that's critically important, something we really need to build. It's been such an issue for so many generations of when these decisions are made to get into these natural resources, the local people don't have a really big say in it directly. So yeah.
Having worked in this space for a while, we could look at it from the state government level or the federal government level. Both of those levels have gone for a divide and conquer perspective. So getting together is one of your big advantages, and getting people to talk and in writing put it together. Then you need to put that forward to your politicians, but not just for the state level Gurmesh here, who was part of the party that diminished the strength of koala protection laws and enabled a lot of this to happen. So don't expect much action from him. But certainly the letter to him is your starting point, because if he doesn't answer you satisfactorily, then you've got an option to raise that issue. I would, if I was you, also send it to other members, particularly Greens members, who will support you along that way. The federal level is frustrating. We've got the EPBC Act, which has failed to protect the koala, despite the fact it's listed. So you could also approach Pat in regards to the federal level and follow that same process through. If you get all of those responses back, and I certainly have tried this and got some pretty poor responses back, then you can raise that issue further up, and then you can head towards the minister. If you've had poor response and lack of action, and you get right up to the minister, who is the decision-making person for that at the state level and federal level, even though I've had pretty poor responses from Susan Leahy, then you've got a chance of getting action. Because at that point, if they still fail you, you can go to the media, and you have that history and that strength, and you have the community together. That's my advice.
Yeah. Congratulations to Tim for getting any response from the Federal Environment Minister. Next question.
I'm actually going to answer your question. Susan Harwood, I'm the facilitator for Friends of Pine Creek, and we also have committee members here from Friends of Pine Creek and Friends of Tucker's Knob. Tucker's Knob is soon to be logged, and just like you, they got letters from forestry. So if you want to come and talk to us, we have been in the fight and are presently in the fight because Tucker's Knob Compartment 9 is about to be logged, and the neighbours have got together and joined their own group, and they're part of Friends of Pine Creek as well, and we're helping support them in the fight that they're going through presently. So if you want to talk to me afterwards, I can put you in contact with the Tucker's Knob neighbours who are doing that fight at the moment.
Fantastic. Do we have any other questions? Usually when there's a ripper like that, it sort of opens the gates. Yeah.
Just on that subject, the new IFOA's, Integrated Forestry Agreements, absolute disgrace. For prospective candidates, they really need to take a close look at that, and Dylan's unpicked it completely, and they're allowing logging within 5-10 metres of watercourse, sedimentation affecting aquatic species. The Carr government had in place pretty comprehensive controls that were being ignored by forestry. You've got absolute ignorance in the forest. There's no selective logging. It's virtually clear fell. They call it intense logging. It's virtually clear fell. You've got to start with that. Candidates, I'd like to hear comment from anyone who's got a view on that. How you overturn those new forestry agreements, I don't know. But, you know, I'm a farmer. I know the value of forests, water quality. They really need to have an opinion, and that needs to be changed. It should, if it's not selective logging, keep out of the forest. I'd rather see them not in there at all.
Okay.
But what they're doing now is an absolute disgrace, and as I say, Dylan has unpicked the information completely, and it's deceitful, and it's needs to be changed. I'd like to hear the opinion of something like that.
So I'm going to take that as an invitation for the candidates to talk about the regional forest agreements, which are very much a federal issue.
Yeah, so I think first and foremost what I would say is it comes back to the core of some of the things I raised earlier, and that is while we don't have an integrity commission, while we don't have transparency in the federal government, and while we don't know what deals are going on behind closed door with lobby groups and big corporate industry and decisions that are being made in the parliament, then we're never going to get anywhere with these issues or any other issues. It's a fundamental issue. It's part of the reason our system's broken. We know that we have to start doing business differently. And I think what I would say to you as an independent candidate, and there's evidence of this in Indi and other seats where there have been independent candidates in similar electorates to ours, it doesn't matter about party politics. I'm not beholden to a party, I'm beholden to the community. So I'm really happy to rattle the cage across levels of government. I'm really happy to listen to the voice of community and make sure we bring the voice of community into the federal parliament and actually have real representation for this region, which we haven't seen in a long time in regards to matters that community want to bring forward. We're getting blocked on all levels because politicians are more interested in the party and they're more interested in their donors and their career politics.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, that's a really great question, considering what I know in regards to Borrell's contract that I believe was just bought out by a Japanese paper company, is only 30 to 40 million, and we could buy that out quite easily. We've looked at putting $100 million towards protecting the koala in some way, and yet we didn't buy out one of the most simple steps that I thought we could do. There are options for us, but certainly we need courage in politics, and we need real regulation of the industry is another side of it. The regulators are not looking over what's happening. Now, the agreement you're talking about, I believe, uses data that's over 20 years old. So we also need to promote science and facts and transparency into politics so that we can get traction on these issues. It's not actually that much money. We could buy them out. We don't need to go down this path. We just need to change our leaders.
Just briefly, I agree completely. This is a problem with centralised government, is that these contracts get made between big business who can cut through the bureaucracies and government, and all the time it's never best practice, because the large companies, the corporate loggers who come in and do these logging, they're interested in just maximising profits and taking everything they can. If we can get it down to a local level, look, I believe that sustainable selective logging in the right circumstances is a very good sustainable industry. But the big but is that it can't just be from a top-down approach. Look, we could battle it out. We could take this to Canberra and both sides could get concessions, but what it'll look like is that the side fighting for national parks, which I'd put myself on, is going to get less than what they want, and the side battling for flat out, straight out industrial logging is going to get what they want, and lost in the bureaucracy is best practice. And I'd like to see localised decision making, so that if there is logging, it's forced to be done in an incredibly sustainable and responsible way. Well, look, I think it is, but it's going to take a lot of effort. Now, sorry, I lost my track of thought. If there was an advisory board from the national parks to go in and supervise and assist in sustainable logging, and if the local community and groups like this were involved to make sure that didn't happen in sensitive land, and make sure that before anything else, the really sensitive and high risk areas were just completely protected, I think we'd be light years ahead where we are now. We can't have a situation where the decisions get made in Canberra and both sides get concessions, but the worst practice is on the ground. So the state government says, okay, instead of 1 million hectares this year, we're going to make 500,000 hectares this year, but it's completely destroyed. Whereas if we could deal with it on a local level, we could make sure that any logging that did take place was done very, very responsibly and well managed and supervised, and the areas that really need protecting were protected properly, and the community was involved. So, look, I sort of stand on both sides of this. I'm an environmentalist at heart, but also I'm involved in the timber industry. As a builder, we use timber products, and we try and do that, or I personally try and do that very sustainably, as much as possible. But we need to balance and really bring best practice on a local level, in my opinion. So,
Thanks, Simon. It's amazing how a sort of a single question can act as such a way of pulling out sort of common concerns. One thing I would really encourage people to do is when you find that something's happening at your local level, have a look for the information that Forestry Corporation's required to put out, and that's through their planning portal, and it'll actually tell you what coops are up for harvesting at any point in time. And it's not just, in fact, where there's active operations, but which of them are in the planning process. It's really easily accessible. It's not the best sort of mapping interface, but you'll be able to find your place there, and it'll give you that sense of, are there other people who are facing the same issue right now while you are? Folks, we are sort of starting to run out of time, so I'm actually just going to go to two more formal questions, and then we're going to wrap things up. But there is an opportunity for you to talk to one another, but most importantly, I'm hoping that some of the candidates and speakers will also be available sort of for those one-on-one discussions over the next while. So, James, do you want to just point me to where yes, there's this talking stick.
Thank you. I'll be quick in that case. I come from Ebor. I've been there for about 70 years. I'm very familiar with the Coffs National Park. I've actually kayaked in it and ridden in it and bushwalked in it. One of the big problems there is it used to be grazed about 150 years by friends of ours. And then about 1982, the National Park came in and they pushed them out, which I guess was part of their role. But since then, about every 6 years, and I know the first 6 years, there was an almighty fire down there. I can still see it going up one ridge and down the other, just going down the gorges there. The amount of damage that fire did to wildlife and ground life was just incredible. Now, every 6 or 8 years since, the same thing has happened. Nothing the National Park has done, basically, to change that policy. They still seem to maintain the same policy of management. And my concern, I guess, would be, while it's a great thing, I'd love to see koalas. So friends of mine have got places up there, stacks of koalas on them. But is that sort of management going to be maintained, or is it going to change? But I'd ask the panel, though, what would you do to keep the national parks accountable so that sort of management doesn't continue?
Great question. Thanks for that. So the Greens have got two focuses in this regard. We need to maintain these forests properly. And how do we do that? Well, firstly, we get the Nationals out. They've decreased the number of fire managers specifically for national parks down from 11 till 3, even though we've had all these fires. This doesn't make sense. We need to make sure we have these people. No wonder there's no one burning there. So the other perspective for the Greens is, let's get our First Nations people involved. Let's see if we can promote First Nations people in management and jobs, obviously, too. Cool burns, while it's difficult, particularly in a changing climate, we need to promote this soon, and as soon as possible, so that we can, one, increase in that amount of jobs and the input into our management of our forests by First Nations people, but also overcome that management issue. I've had that question brought to me a couple of times over the years, and it's certainly an issue that hasn't been dealt with by the current government. Certainly the Greens have those two focuses. Firstly, let's actually make sure the funding is there to manage it. We don't just lock up national parks. What we do is we get management and we get plans and we follow them through. And we do that appropriately to save lives and health, but also promote the species. And secondly, let's get more First Nations people into the land management. They did pretty well before, and we're not doing it quite as well at this point. So that's the Greens' proposal at this point.
Yeah, I agree entirely. This is a problem. Human beings are part of the Australian ecosystem. They have been for tens of thousands of years. And I think over the years, a well-meaning policy from people who are in, well-meaning people have had the opinion that you should just lock up land and let it do its thing. Now, that's devastating. If you cold burn regularly, like it's been happening for the last tens of thousands of years through human interaction with the land, it promotes there's native species that won't germinate, won't grow unless they experience man-made fire, and wildfire will kill them. So I've grown up with this. Our property in the Blue Mountains is lush. It's covered with native species. We've never experienced, it's in bushfire-prone land. We've seen bushfires surround us, and the land that was maintained and it was religiously burned and cold burned, should I say. Never ever seen a dead animal in 40 odd years of being involved in backburning. I've seen a hell of a lot of dead animals through wildfires. So this is the maintenance that needs to happen, and for national parks or any, this shouldn't just be national parks. This should be practice that's encouraged across the board. But it takes effort, it takes good policy, local policy, resources, and I think we really need to focus on that. We can't have bushfires. I was up at Ebor just after the fires, cleaning up, and it was devastating. That land takes decades to recover from a fire like that. Whereas if it's maintained, if it's cold burned, it remains. We've got rainforests that are turning to dry temperate forests because they're not burned, and they're not cold burned, should I say? They're not back burned. And it doesn't look. Every ecosystem is different, and you need to address each one locally. I like what you said about bringing First Nation people back in, reviving that knowledge and those practices. That's what's needed on a local level, I think.
I'm going to invite Dylan up to the stand, and break every sort of convention of being an MC by making a comment myself. Look, I suspect there's many people across this room who spend a lot of time chasing after wildfire and hazard reduction. It is something that we're all used to in these landscapes. But I would really encourage people to actually look at the science which has been coming out since the 2019-20 fires and understand that not all forests are the same. And there's a lot of perverse stuff that happens, particularly as we get into the wetter forests, where it's very clear the evidence that's building is the more disturbance we build into wetter forest types, the more we actually create landscapes that are prone to fire.
So I'd actually like to support that. Fire frequency pre-European in our wetter forests was very rare, but even in our drier forests, it was still often measured in decades. And there were areas Aboriginal people obviously burnt frequently for their various reasons, but not the whole landscape. And I've been through all the charcoal records I could find for North East New South Wales, and look, there's not that many, but none of them indicate a really high fire frequency, even dry stuff, before Europeans got here. And this is going back thousands of years of records. And in fact, you look at all the fire statistics from around Australia, and you get this burning frequency in Aboriginal times. White people come here and just go straight up. So we moved into this landscape and we burnt the shit out of it, basically. And there's been work done by Zylstra, a really good researcher, who's looked at fire in the Victorian Alps and more recently in Western Australia. And it's the old growth forest that is the most, that hasn't been burnt for a long time, that's most resistant to fire. What happens when you have a fire is you start all this growth of things like wattles and fire-tolerant species, and so you get this massive flush, and of course you make the forest more vulnerable for fire. So it takes about 40 years for your forest to recover from this, unfortunately. It's a long time to try to keep it out. But the long-term solution is reducing fire frequency if we can in most ecosystems, or certainly heading towards what a natural fire frequency would be. And it's not every year. And I don't know any ecosystem where it's every year. So, let's not get too carried away with this idea of just burning this country to death. And that's going on in too many places. So, look, it's not easy. We've altered the structure of our forest so much through logging. Logging also increases fire frequency as well and fire intensity. You know, we've degraded our native vegetation, and look, it's a bloody hard job to recover it now. But you look around after these fires, and so many areas are just wattled everywhere. You know, we've increased it, from that one fire, has increased the flammability of our forests for decades to come. And I don't know what to do about it. I don't have an answer. But it's not just to burn it. I mean, if we get people out there cutting down 9/10 of the wattles, we might have a chance. But you know, the trouble is when you burn it, you're also burning everything else in that too. So all the regenerating trees, all those things all get burned as well. So look, nothing simple because we've stuffed up this country a lot. But please, let's not carry it away with just burning it all the time. Thanks.
All right. James, where have you bequeathed the last talking stick?
I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners, the Gambia people, and I'd also like to pay respects to Ashley Love, who actually was the initiator, whose vision it was for the Great Koala Park. And I actually feel very proud. I was in the room when the vision happened, and I saw his face, I saw the vision. We were talking about how to save the koalas in the Ballingen Environment Centre meeting, and we were talking about 3 meta populations, and Ashley just looked at the map and went, my God, it's one Great Koala National Park. So I'd just like to say I love you, Ashley, and thank you for everything you've taught me. And I'm actually going to put another hat on. I'm from the Australian Forest Network, which is the group that we formed for the federal election, and I'm from Communities for Forests. This is our federal poster, which we love, thanks Jess. And I just like to ask every candidate, do you have a policy to stop native forest logging? Just yes or no. Thank you.
What a beautiful issue to finish on, the very simplest and the very biggest of them all. Okay, candidates.
One simple answer?
Yep.
My simple answer is consultation. And it needs yes to happen. No? Well, it's not. Yes or no? It's no to a written policy now, but it's yes to doing the right thing with both sides and community. Thank you. Yeah.
Tim?
The Greens have a policy to end native forest logging in the state forest.
Simon?
No, I don't. But to clarify, I strongly believe that we should absolutely have a policy to... That's such a hard question. You can't have yes and no answers to something like that. I believe we should absolutely protect our forests. I don't think that... I think that the native timber industry needs to be reformed.
Thanks all. Look, I'm sorry that we can't keep talking through the rest of the evening, but we do need to bring proceedings to an end. Can I just say, I'm so grateful that everyone's turned up tonight. It is such an energising thing. The debate tonight has been a fantastic reminder that the future of our fauna, our wildlife, the future of our forests is not just an issue for one tier of government. It's for all governments to come to a realisation that they have this extraordinary responsibility to the future. Not just to us, the people who are sort of sitting here today, but it's to those future generations. And the thing that resonates with me so strongly about the Great Koala National Park is I can't imagine a landscape that so deserves that big idea of permanent protection at the whole of landscape level. This is such a special place. You know, as I said at the start of this, MPA has been involved in developing proposals for national parks for more than 6 decades. For me, the Great Koala National Park is the proposal of this generation. It is the most meritorious that I can imagine at this point in time. And I just want to thank everybody for your contributions tonight, and to hope that this has also been a bit of a source of hope for you, that this is a positive experience, and that you've now got a bit more information about the way that your candidates see themselves interacting with this proposal. Thanks, everybody.